Today on The State of Us, the end of Roe v. Wade and what it means for the country moving forward. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by Mr. Lance L. Jackson. We're looking at the end of Roe v. Wade as it's been overturned by the Supreme Court, which I'm sure by now our listeners have heard. So what are we hoping to add to today's conversation? Well, first up, we're going to try to make sense of what's going on, make sure people are really on the same page about what the decision is and how it affects them, but then also talk about some of the implications of this, both in the near term and the straightforward implications and the potential longer range concerns that some people may have, or longer range hopes that some people may have. So obviously, a lot of the country feels very differently about this. Today, though, we're endeavoring to share what we think, share where things are at, and talk about where we go from here. So Lance, do we have a word of the day?
We do. 5 syllables. It is a noun. The word is ramification. R-A-M-I-F-I-C-A-T-I-O-N. A derived effect or consequence or result, such as the ramifications of an act. And we got lots of ramifications happening, I think, with this decision. So many of which we don't maybe yet understand or don't even know where we're going, but there will be results, some desired and some undesired by both sides, I think, once the dust has settled on this ruling and states making their own decisions. And, in many ways, there are people out there that are saying, oh, it's all over now. And I think this is really just the beginning of a whole new chapter of this fight and argument, and not in that, abortions aren't going to go away. Whatever the legal decisions are by the Supreme Court, by the State House, by governors, by cities, because I've seen some cities starting to make decisions, as well. Those governments making decisions. There will still be people who will try to get an abortion, whether it's legal or illegal, such as there was before Roe versus Wade. And that was one of the biggest arguments by nurses in the medical community and doctors before Roe versus Wade became law, was that this is going on anyway. We need to make it safe. Just because you change the law doesn't mean you're going to stop the act.
So what does the law now say? Well, for those that aren't familiar, Roe v. Wade basically established a benchmark sort of set of guiding principles that everybody, all states had to follow, specifically around trimesters. So what happens now that Roe v. Wade is gone? Does this mean that abortion has been outlawed in the United States? No, that's not what this means. What the Supreme Court has essentially said, and again, motivations and all that, we can talk about those things, but what has essentially happened is the Supreme Court has basically said the federal government is relinquishing its authority to tell states to do things one way or the other. In other words, the federal government officially now has no opinion on the matter of abortion and its legality one way or the other. So if you live in the state of California, your state is welcome to make abortions accessible to everybody with no restrictions if that's what you want to do. And if you live in the state of Ohio, your state is welcome to say you can never get an abortion for any reason under any circumstances. Now that, by the way, would be an exaggeration, I think, in both states of exactly what the laws are, because that's not the case. I'm just merely illustrating an example of what the Supreme Court has done is basically say we're going back to the way it was before Roe, which is to say states are going to make decisions for themselves about what, if any, law they want and what the law will say. So you have some states that actually have guaranteed protection for abortion as part of their either legal documents or their state constitution. But you now have 22 states that are banning, that are likely to ban or have already banned abortions quickly now that Roe has been overturned. And 13 of those states have trigger laws that have already gone into effect. In other words, are already effective. So there's an interesting piece from USA Today that's got a couple of good maps of the United States and shows you sort of the difference in the states across the union and if they have some kind of ban, when the ban goes into effect. So you have states that have a pre-Roe ban in effect. In other words, something that was on the books prior to Roe that technically would now again be in action. You have trigger bans, things that were passed that if Roe was overturned as it has been, now go into effect. States that have a near total ban, states with 6-week bans, states with 8-week bans, and state constitutions that are essentially bar protecting abortion. So in other words, they don't allow, laws to be created that protect them. And then you have a handful of states that have no law one way or the other. And I think in some ways, those states are very tricky because they were operating basically under, the federal government said this, so that's what we're operating under, but our state actually doesn't have any guidance one way or the other. And then, of course, you have states where it is, in fact, protected.
It has now become what the Supreme Court ruled was that that abortions are not illegal. They ruled that it is now a state decision. And that's what people need to understand. It is now going to be a fight, an argument, a debate at each level of every state, except to your point, some states have already decided that and put laws into place that said as soon as Roe versus Wade was overturned, it became a state issue. These were the laws that were going to go into effect. And so the ramifications of this are immense. We're not going to get into them right now. Stay tuned and we'll get into that. But just very simply, there will be 50 different laws, most likely, concerning abortion. And there is going to be some evolution of these laws as governments, state governments, local governments are elected, reelected, thrown out of office, and majorities change, and they will constantly be tinkering with this to decide what the people in their state want. And the voters in that state will get to decide based on what legislators and leaders they put into office. And so I think this will be an ongoing battle in all 50 states because that's what the Supreme Court has said. Said, you know what? We're not ruling on it. So now it's 50 different fights instead of one national fight.
Well, and I think, too, it's worth pointing out the headline of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition, right, under the main picture is that this has been 5 decades in the making. It's not like, and I guess that's a hard thing because depending on where you come down on the issue, you either feel this strongly or you don't. There were a lot of people that when Roe was decided, it wasn't settled for them then. And it hasn't been settled for 5 decades.
Well, see, and they're just referring to the fact of when the decision was handed down. I would claim that it's been a 60 or 70 year fight for conservatives in this country who felt like they were disrespected when, the country turned away from Barry Goldwater in 1964. And when we began with the court's rulings on civil rights matters and women's matters and the rights of the accused, there was a real backlash, but that was the mood of the country as we moved after World War II, as we moved through the 50s and the 60s. And then it just became a part of, yes, this is what's going to be. And we saw where we continued to add personal rights to all different kinds of people on sexuality issues and marriage issues. And people thought, hey, this is, it's going to be here forever. But there were these group of people who were, we'll grant them conservatives by the newspaper title, who had been working behind the scenes in school boards and state legislatures and state houses and governors who have been working on this as well as at the federal level. And what we have now is this plan, to your point of, you use the phrase trigger laws that were passed in many of these more conservative states that said, well, as soon as Roe goes away, here's the law that we're implementing. That shows you that wasn't reactionary. That was put in advance, right? So that wasn't a reaction to Roe being overturned. It was when Roe's overturned, this is the law in our state. So it is a well-planned strategy. And for those of you who are taken aback by this or surprised, where were you in American history class, in American government class? This is the system that we have. And I think too many times people just think, well, it's never going to change because it's this way now. That is not the history of our country. Now, change doesn't happen quickly, but change does happen, both good and bad.
Especially when there's persistence. And I think the one thing that regardless of where you come down on the issue is this has not, people would say, well, Roe settled it. Well, no, it didn't. And clearly it didn't. Clearly it was not settled. This is a clear indication of that. There are many people and the country, historically has been fairly divided on this. Even the middle ground people have a hard time with, well, it should probably be legal in certain circumstances, but not in other circumstances. And over the years, as Lance and I have discussed the issue, I think, it's not a bang the drum and be like, oh, you're right. But I don't think that we had settled it back then. I think we had a Supreme Court that had cases in front of them that was trying to come up with an answer and came up with an answer to the question, an answer that, truthfully, many legal scholars all over have criticized the legal arguments of the case. There was, quite a lot of pressure to try to figure out what our laws say about it. And the reality is, federal law doesn't maybe say as much as our nation wants it to say, but that doesn't change the reality of everybody's very upset. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be, because the Supreme Court's obviously the one that overturned this, so they have their blame. But in my opinion, it's not just the current court you should be upset with. You should also be upset with the Roe decision, because maybe if it had been better written, maybe if it had been better argued, and maybe you should be upset with lawmakers back then and your lawmakers today, because if your lawmakers had made law, we wouldn't have probably been relying on the Supreme Court anyway.
Well, and to your point, it's not over. That's the point I'm trying to make.
It wasn't over when
the decision was
Roe
made.
Was decided, and it's
right,
not over now.
It's not over now with the decision that this court made, because the nation is so split on this issue.
We're going to talk more about the implications forthcoming, not just with the decision directly, but also what about the other things this could affect? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. We were talking about this the other day. Lance told me that he's upset with liberals. He's upset with them. Interesting. Why? Why? The liberals haven't done anything wrong, Lance. They've been standing on the moral high ground. They don't do anything wrong.
They forgot to do the work.
Oh.
They forgot to do the work. They left the middle of America. They took middle America for granted, which there are the majority of states. And they forgot.
Well, why does that matter? Who cares?
They forgot the way this country was formed. The the liberals have wanted to control the presidency. And so, the Electoral College, the more populated states get more Electoral College votes, right? They get more representation in the House of Representatives. And you have California and New York, which combined basically give you 25 to 30% of the votes you need for president. However, those states, according to the Constitution that we put in place after the Articles of Confederation, which means, we couldn't even decide on a government when we first decided we were going to go to war for our independence. But that's another issue for another day. We decided...
kind of a big one.
We decided that each state, and this was so we could have a country, folks. Okay, you get it? We said, well, we have to compromise, and we're going to give every state, no matter the population, 2 senators. So all of these states in the middle of the country that now exist all have 2 senators, even if they only have a fraction of the population of a California or a New York.
Why do we do that?
Which means, well, again, it was a compromise so that people would get together and say, okay, we have a common enemy and we will fight that common enemy because we feel like now we have a say. We don't want to be upset with the say that the King of England has over us and then turn around and let somebody else dictate that say to us. Oh, you mean states' rights? Here we go, right? So it was an issue from the very beginning. And my concern with the liberals, my frustration with them is, well, we got our way and now everybody's just going to continue to follow us, and we don't necessarily really have to meet your needs or talk to you because we are the dominant force now, and we're just going to go along and we're going to get rights here and do this and do that and do, which isn't wrong. It isn't bad, but you forgot about the people who put you in power in the first place. And what the conservatives have quietly done, as one of these Wall Street Journal articles agrees with me, because I was saying this before they wrote this.
Just putting that out there.
Just putting it out there.
Just putting it out there.
That
Lance was talking about these ramifications long before.
If you sat in my history class, you listened to this. I was talking about it.
Okay.
That this is a long-term plan, and the Republicans and the conservatives, as Justin always accuses me of coining the phrase, they play to win. And they have a long game. And their long game is now coming to fruition because, again, I'm referring to those trigger laws, but how in the world do you get those? How do you get laws passed that don't go into effect until something happens that one side thought would never happen? That's long range planning. I mean, to me, it's obvious, right? But this is all about the liberals forgetting who put them in power in the first place, and going out there and just taking care of the 2 coasts of the United States and forgetting about the people in middle America. And I won't go into the hard working and all of that kind of stuff because I think the people on the coast work hard as well. But there are differences, right? If you've ever traveled this great nation, wherever you are, the people are different. They have different interests. They have different concerns. They have different ideas. And that's what makes America great. But if you are going to be a ruling party in America, you need to remember all of the people. You can't just focus on some of the people because that's where you're going to, quote, get the power. And I've ranted for years in my class about this. The presidency is not the power place in the United States. It just isn't. It's easier to talk about one person than it is today 435 members of Congress who actually make the law, right? Well, it's the president's fault that it's like this. Is it really? Because who made the law? Congress. Okay? The president cannot make law. Read the Constitution. And then it's like, well, but even if Congress makes the law and the president signs it into law, you still have to go through the Supreme Court who determines whether or not it's constitutional. There's some argument to be made that the most powerful branch of government in the United States is the Supreme Court, which is the one that most Americans know the very least about. The idea is it's supposed to work, that no one branch has too much power. So then it takes 2 out of the 3 to agree to get something done, which we've seen historically, Andrew Jackson and moving the Cherokee Indians, where Congress wanted to move the Indians. Jackson said, yeah, we're going to move the Indians. The Indians went to court. The Indians won in the Supreme Court, said, you can't move us. And Jackson and Congress said, yeah, well, just watch us. We're going to move them anyway. And they did. And the Supreme Court sat there wringing their hands because the Supreme Court has no way to enforce their decisions except through the president, who is supposed to be in charge of enforcing the laws of the United States. And so I would make that analogy to my students, and they were like, so which branch is the strongest? And the point is, they're not. It takes 2 out of the 3. Basic, simple civics here, folks, at play. And the Democrats and the liberals forgot it.
And here's the right. It's, well, why does any of this matter? Well, understanding why we have the system we have. And this is part of what frustrates me too, Lance, about, and this is, I know this is a broad generalization, but it's generally true that younger people tend to be more liberal. And as you get older, you tend to become more conservative. Generally speaking, that's true. It's not always the case. But generally speaking, that's true. And one of the things that just irks me with some millennials and Gen Z, is this, well, I don't, revolutionary history doesn't matter at all. And I don't need to know. And it's like, well, okay, but if you don't like what happened with Roe, that's part of why things like this happen, because you don't know how the system works and you don't know why it was set up the way it was and what it enables. So I agree in that frustration with that liberal agenda of, well, this doesn't, and not that conservatives know history great either, but to Lance's point, they do understand what powers exist in the system and how to use those powers to their advantage. Some may say exploit, but they use them within the legal confines that already exist to force the system over many years, many decades, in a direction that they want it to go. And I think that understanding that the way that we ended up with the Constitution we have is partly because, why do we start out with the Articles of Confederation? Well, we were super scared of centralized power, partly because that's what we fought to get away from. So this idea of, well, let's create this really strong federal government, that was scary to a lot of people because it's like, well, isn't that what we just tried to get rid of? Isn't that what we were just complaining about, is a government that was aloof, that didn't understand the people and did things that we didn't like? Isn't that the problem? So we tried something that said, well, we're basically going to have a federal government that has almost no power, really can't do anything unless all the states are on the same page about wanting to do something. And then we found out, well, that doesn't work because it's very difficult and the states will refuse to help and they won't do what they're told. And then everybody suffers because one state, holds out. So the great compromise, right? And you correct me if I'm wrong, Lance, but to boil this down for people to understand, there were two important concerns to balance. Number one, I'm a big state like Virginia. How is it I ought to have, right, a say based on the number of people I have? Because I have a large percentage at the time. I have a large percentage of the United States population. So rightfully so, I ought to have a decent say in what takes place because I have more people than, say, Rhode Island, right? So therefore, I should have a larger say. And Rhode Island says, well, yes, you have more people, but then how do I make sure that my people don't get steamrolled by your people? How do we protect the rights of the minority from you just doing whatever you want, regardless of whether or not it's good for Rhode Island? And Virginia says, well, we don't care. And Rhode Island says, well, but we do care, and so we have this problem, right, between how do we balance the needs of the population, the majority, with the rights of the minority. And that, again, whether or not you like it, that's how essentially you come up with the great compromise of we will have two legislative bodies in government. We will have one that is based on population, and we will have one that is based on the states.
That's a fair analysis of what we have. And then it takes both of those lawmaking bodies to agree before a law is sent to the president for their approval. So we get manipulated by the national media out there who tells us, well, yeah, I heard the Senate passed a law. And I just roll my eyes and people, well, they did. I'm like, the Senate can't pass laws. Okay. Well, that's what the news said. Right. And they're wrong.
The news says a lot of things.
Right. They're wrong. Okay. Or Joe Scarborough says it, or Tucker Carlson says it. Okay. Well, they're wrong if they say that. That's not the way it works. Okay. I'm not saying they say it particularly, but I mean, I think almost more people listen to them on either side of the aisle than they do the national media. But that's why I flip off the television, because it's like, no, that's not the way it works. And you just told all these people that are watching that that's the way it works. And now they believe that, and it doesn't work. You just undid everything that I did in my history class for all those years. But, to the point of frustration, and you said, the long game of the conservatives, remember President Obama had the right to put a member on the Supreme Court, and everybody was frustrated with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, but they did their due diligence and they said, yeah, well, you can keep sending us names, but we're not even going to, we control, the conservatives control the Congress.
And
they control the Senate because the Senate approves, again, one of the things of the Great Compromise. The Senate has to approve all presidential appointments. And so the Republican senators said, yeah, we're just not going to take that up and discuss it. To my point earlier, there are more Democrats than there are Republicans as registered voters in the United States. Don't argue with me. That's just, I'm just stating a fact. Okay. So the Democrats ought to win every election. So the Democrats either have to switch sides or not go vote. And we've done multiple shows on many of those key states that President Trump won in 2016. He got either Democrats to vote for him, or in most cases, Democrats didn't even bother to vote, which then allowed the Republican minority in that state to hand him that state's electoral college. And so now those same people, many of whom are complaining about this decision, have nobody to blame but themselves because they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton back in 2016.
Is states' rights only something that protects conservatives? Because right now, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that feel that way. And what about the other decisions that might be affected by this? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. The last time we talked about states' rights, Lance, I think I tried to point this out, that it's easy when a decision like this, right, Roe v. Wade is handed down to be, or the overturning of Roe v. Wade, is handed down for people who were supportive of Roe, right, that, well, this is another reason that states' rights are stupid and, this shouldn't be, and this business about states all choosing their own thing. Okay, but now, as somebody who's a supporter of marriage equality, let's just rewind the tape here a little bit.
Right.
Because states' rights are also the reason that gay marriage became legal in many states across the United States long before it was federally accepted across the nation.
Well, I'll go back even further than that. Women got the right to vote in states long before it became federal law. And it was the fact that so many states had said, well, women in our state can vote. Now, they couldn't vote in a federal election, but they could vote in state elections.
Right, we're going to let you vote in these things.
But eventually, Congress looked at each other and said, well, you know what? The majority of the states already allow women to vote, so we're going to approve women's right to vote. It wasn't the magnanimous federal government who gave women the right to vote. It was each individual little state that accumulated to where the majority of states had already given women the right to vote that forced the hand of the federal government to then give women the right to vote. So it happened with women's right to vote. It happened, to your point, with equality in marriage, that it was individual states that moved first to say, you can get married in Hawaii, you can get married in Massachusetts, you can get married. And that then pushed the federal government to say, well, maybe we need to make this nationwide. So to your point, two very liberal ideas for their time first passed in the states. So states' rights got and advanced the argument to be then adopted by the federal government. Excellent points. Depending on your approach, you make it work for you or for the other side. And what we talk about is, well, where's the common ground? And we call it the Great Compromise, right? That's what established the government to run this new country. So compromise is the key to the existence of the United States. And we need to have more compromise if we're going to continue to exist.
Marriage equality, women's right to vote, and if we go back even further, the end of slavery started in states.
That's right.
Now, yes, in all of those cases, right, the federal government eventually came in and made a decision. However, I think that the thing that's very telling about all of those is before you dismiss the importance of states' rights, it can be very difficult to get the federal government, as I think is perfectly demonstrated by Roe v. Wade, to pass legislation that is contentious. That's what was demonstrated, especially the marriage thing. I'd separate out because we'd still say, well, there's not a federal law that guarantees that the way there is. Okay, I guess I shouldn't say that because the Supreme Court tells us there is. But as we've also seen, the Supreme Court can change its mind. But there are laws that I think most people would contend are very explicit in guaranteeing women's right to vote and also the end of slavery. Those are spelled out very plainly.
Which is where, if you want to take the courts out of it, you make an interesting point there. And I don't even know if you realized it. You get an amendment in the Constitution because that is a lot harder to get out of law than a Supreme Court decision.
Right.
On any topic, right?
Yeah.
And we put slavery and women's right to vote in the Constitution.
Right.
Now, can you take amendments out of the Constitution? Yes.
But the Supreme Court's not going to be the one to do that.
But the Supreme Court doesn't do that. Guess who does? The states.
Back to that understanding how the Constitution works, right? And again, we don't have to like how I guess that's the message today, right? Is you don't have to like this decision, and maybe you do like this decision, but regardless, it's understanding how it came to be, and if you don't like it, how do we change it? Well, there's a couple ways, right? There's more than one way. Yes, I get why people are frustrated with the Supreme Court, but again, I think we should be more frustrated. Two things. If you don't like this decision, you ought to be frustrated with yourself and probably your party. And you ought to be frustrated there by extension with your legislators, your elected representatives, because Congress has the authority right now, today, to advance a constitutional amendment if they wanted to. Also if they don't want to do that, if that's too big of a hurdle, they have the ability to advance a law, And I think most legal experts would agree that it would be, yes, there's a potential legal challenge. The Supreme Court, this federal law that guarantees abortion or whatever could be challenged, but it would be a lot harder, right? Where the court previously was trying to interpret more abstract concepts of the Constitution and say this and this and this. If there's a federal law that's more explicit, it becomes a whole different ballgame. The point being, there are options. And we've never actually successfully done it, but a constitutional convention is also an option, Granted, we don't really know exactly how that's supposed to work because despite the fact that it's available, it's never really happened. We've tried to do it a few times.
But I just want to throw in, because we're running out of time, but I want to throw in another ramification for those of you who are listening to the show, and thank you, who are happy about this decision. And that is, this decision has not stopped abortion. As Justin pointed out, there are many states that are still going to allow abortions. Secondly, and I remember this, because I was alive at the time, one of the major arguments of passing Roe v. Wade was that abortions were going on, even though it was illegal. Just because you make it illegal in your state doesn't mean abortions are going to stop. What you've done is make it more dangerous for those people who want them. Okay. So you didn't, again, if you're excited about the decision, that's fine. You have the right to be if that's the way you personally feel. But understand the ramification is you didn't stop abortions. You made it illegal. Abortions went on before Roe versus Wade when it was illegal. They will go on still, even though the decision has been made in Roe v. Wade. So just understand that, right? We deal with facts here. And you can get mad at me and say, well, I don't care. I'm telling you, you didn't stop abortions. They're still going to take place.
Well,
even if they get outlawed in all 50 states, they will take place. All you have to do is read your history book. Talk to the nurses and the doctors who were around seeing people who got the illegal abortions, some of which were fine, many of which were ruined or even killed because they sought it. And you can say, well, that's what they get. You people up on high who are God and say, well, they got what they deserved. Really? It's your job to judge people? Because in your book, it says, ye without sin cast the first stone, right? So don't know that we're supposed to sit in judgment of others. Sorry, just had to say it. We're getting low on time. Had to throw it out there because I'm sick and tired too of listening to people say, oh, there won't be any more abortions in the United States. Number one, that's not what the law says. It's up to the states. And even if your state outlaws them, doesn't mean you're going to stop women from seeking them who feel like that's the only recourse for them.
And raising the larger issue of, yes, the number of abortions will probably decrease. The ones that do happen may be less safe. And for the ones that don't, we will have more children to take care of, which, again, for those that feel that way, is not necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying having more children is bad, but the question poses itself of what are we going to do?
You willing to pay higher taxes to take care of them?
Well, and maybe you are, but that's to the point of when we've discussed this before. And the thing that so frustrates me is I think that one side said that Roe v. Wade has settled it, which is obviously not true. And the other side had said that we have to overturn Roe v. Wade and then it will be settled, which is also not true. The issue has never been settled in this country. And I guess what I hope comes from this, Lance, is that we try to come up with a better solution than we've come up with so far. I feel like I've been saying that for many years, and I wish so badly that I had the better answer. But I also believe that if we all are really trying to come up with something better, I want to believe that in this nation that is possible for us to come up with something better than both things which we have tried. Patchwork state legislation, the federal court system saying we're going to do it this way, people being upset about that, going back now to the other way. We've done all this crap, and clearly it doesn't work well. It upsets almost half of the population no matter which way we go. So clearly we got to do something better than what we've been doing. I guess that, if anything, is what I take away from this, is we have not yet arrived at the right solution, because clearly if we had, we still wouldn't be going through all this. So, Lance, why do we have this conversation today? What's the point?
Well, because here at True Chat, we have a mission, and our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And hopefully you've enjoyed today's show. And if you agree or disagree with us, please, we're always open to listener comments and email us at podcast@thestateofus.org what you think. And I agree with Justin that we need to find a better solution to this, that this isn't better. But, if you're talking to your friends and family and they say, well, where do you get some of these ideas? Well, I listen to this show, and they call The State of Us, and they go, well, how can I get it? As a podcast, tell them they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. We're also heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the country. For The State of Us on True Chat, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.